The first thing I noticed when I came home 3 days early was not the suitcase sitting beside my front door, or the unfamiliar muddy shoes near the stairs, or even the strange silence inside the house. It was the look on my best friend's face when she opened the door and saw me standing there with my passport in one hand and a bouquet of flowers in the other. Her smile disappeared so quickly that my heart dropped before I even understood why. She looked past me toward the driveway, then back at me, and whispered something that made the blood drain from my face. She begged me not to go upstairs. If this story reminds you that kindness, forgiveness, hope, and second chances can change a life, please take a moment to like this video, leave a comment, share it with someone who may need hope today, and subscribe to our channel so we can continue sharing stories that touch the heart. My name is Callum Reed, and for most of my adult life, I believed I knew exactly what friendship meant. To me, friendship was showing up when someone needed you, keeping promises when they became inconvenient, and knowing when to forgive without being asked. My best friend, Betrayal, had been beside me for almost 12 years. We met when we were both working at a small publishing company in Portland, and somehow our friendship survived career changes, failed relationships, family problems, financial struggles, and the countless ordinary disappointments that quietly test whether two people truly care about each other. Betrayal was the kind of person who remembered everyone's birthday but forgot to eat lunch herself. She could make a joke when she was frightened, smile when she was exhausted, and tell everyone she was fine even when her eyes said otherwise. I had always admired that about her, although I sometimes wished she would allow someone to take care of her for once. When I accepted a 6-week overseas assignment, I immediately worried about my house. I had spent years restoring the old 2-story home my grandmother had left me, and I did not trust strangers to look after it. Betrayal volunteered before I even finished asking. She insisted that she would stay there, collect the mail, water the plants, feed the neighbor's cat, and make sure nothing went wrong. I laughed at how seriously she took the responsibility, but secretly I was relieved. Before leaving, I gave her the spare keys, showed her where everything was, and reminded her that the upstairs guest room was still being renovated and should remain locked. There was nothing mysterious about that room. It simply contained boxes of my grandmother's belongings, old photographs, furniture waiting to be repaired, and several personal documents I had not yet decided what to do with. I trusted Betrayal completely, so I never imagined I would have any reason to worry. The trip began normally, but after 4 weeks, everything changed. A transportation strike disrupted my return flight, and then another delay pushed my schedule back even further. I eventually learned that an earlier flight had opened, and I booked it without telling Betrayal. I wanted to surprise her. I imagined walking through my front door while she was drinking coffee, watching her jump in surprise, and then laughing together about how I had managed to return early. I even bought flowers at the airport because I knew she loved them. I spent the entire journey home imagining the expression on her face. Instead, when she opened the door, she looked terrified. She stepped backward as though she had seen a ghost. Her fingers tightened around the edge of the door, and for several seconds neither of us spoke. I tried to smile, but something about her expression made it impossible. Then her eyes moved toward the staircase. She swallowed hard and told me not to go upstairs. She did not explain. She did not even try to pretend everything was normal. She simply stood there as though she was trying to keep a disaster from reaching me. My first thought was that someone had broken into the house. My second was that she had been hurt. My third, and most painful, was that she had done something behind my back. The trust one had placed in her suddenly felt fragile. I asked what was upstairs, but she would not answer. Her silence was worse than any explanation could have been. I walked into the living room and noticed things I had never seen before. There were 2 additional chairs around the dining table. A child's drawing sat beneath a magnet on the refrigerator. A small backpack rested beside the sofa. There was a half-finished bowl of cereal on the kitchen counter and a pair of tiny sneakers near the hallway. None of those things belonged to me or Betrayal. Then I heard a sound from above. It was faint, but unmistakable. Someone was moving across the upstairs floor. I looked at Brielle, and the expression in her eyes told me everything I needed to know. There was someone in my house. My anger rose instantly. I had trusted her with everything, and now there was a stranger upstairs. I felt betrayed, frightened, and humiliated. I started toward the staircase, but Brielle stepped directly in front of me. She looked as though she was fighting tears. She finally told me that the person upstairs was not a criminal, not a thief, and not someone she had invited for herself. She told me there was a woman staying in the locked guest room with a little girl. They had arrived several days earlier after Brielle had found them sitting outside a community shelter during a terrible storm. The woman was named Marin, and her daughter, Elsie, was 7 years old. They had been sleeping wherever they could find shelter after Marin lost her apartment. At first, Brielle had only intended to help them for one afternoon. She brought them food, helped Marin contact a housing organization, and tried to arrange temporary accommodation. But the housing placement fell through, and Marin became seriously ill from exhaustion. Brielle could not bring herself to leave a frightened mother and her child outside. So she brought them to my house. I stared at her in disbelief. She knew she had broken my trust. She knew she had crossed a boundary. She knew the guest room was private, and she had entered it anyway. But there was something in her face that made my anger hesitate. She was not defending herself. She was ashamed. Then she told me the part that changed everything. Marin had once worked as a medical receptionist. She had spent years caring for other people, but after losing her husband unexpectedly, her life had collapsed under debts and grief. She had been trying to rebuild everything while raising Elsie alone. Brielle had discovered that Marin was refusing help because she was terrified that accepting charity would make her daughter feel ashamed. Brielle had brought them into my home because she believed temporary safety was more important than permission. I wanted to be furious, and part of me was. My home was my sanctuary, and she had made a decision that belonged to me. But then I looked toward the stairs and heard a child's quiet footsteps. A little girl appeared at the top of the staircase. Elsie was holding an old stuffed rabbit against her chest. Her hair was messy, and she looked frightened. She stared at me for only a moment before looking down at the floor. Behind her stood Marin, pale and embarrassed, one hand resting protectively on her daughter's shoulder. I expected excuses. Instead, Marin apologized. She said she knew she should never have stayed there without my permission. She said Brielle had promised they would leave as soon as they found another safe place. She told me that she had tried to convince Brielle not to risk our friendship, but Brielle had refused to let them return to the street. Then Elsie quietly asked whether I was going to make them leave. That question broke something inside me. I had spent years believing that doing the right thing was simple. Help someone, keep your promises, protect your boundaries, forgive people when they make mistakes. But standing there, looking at a frightened child who had already lost more security than any child should have to experience, I realized life rarely gives us clean choices. I told them they could stay. Brielle began crying immediately. I did not forgive her that day. Not completely. I told her that what she had done was serious and that trust could not simply be repaired with an apology. She nodded because she knew I was right. But I also told Marin and Elsie that they would not be forced onto the street while I had a safe home available. Over the next few days, I learned how much Brielle had been doing quietly. She had contacted housing organizations, arranged job interviews for Marin, collected groceries, helped Elsie with schoolwork, and even sold some of her own belongings to cover expenses. She had never told me any of it because she knew I would be angry about what she had done with my house. One afternoon, I found Brielle sitting alone on the back porch, staring at the garden. She finally admitted that she had been afraid of losing me. She said she knew she had crossed a line, but every time she imagined sending Marin and Elsie away, she remembered what it felt like to have nowhere safe to go. Years earlier, Brielle herself had once depended on a stranger's kindness during the hardest period of her life. She had never forgotten it. That was when I understood why she had been so afraid when I came home. She wasn't afraid that I would discover a secret. She was afraid I would become the person who told them they had nowhere else to go. I sat beside her and told her that she had made a terrible decision for a beautiful reason. Both things could be true at the same time. She had violated my trust, but she had also protected two vulnerable people when it would have been easier to walk away. I forgave her. Not because what she did was harmless, but because forgiveness does not always mean pretending nothing happened. Sometimes forgiveness means acknowledging the mistake, setting better boundaries, and choosing not to let one painful moment destroy years of love and loyalty. Within 2 weeks, Maren found a position at a medical office. The owner had heard about her situation and decided to give her an opportunity. A local housing organization helped her secure a small apartment, and soon Elsie had a room of her own for the first time in months. On the morning they moved out, Elsie hugged me tightly and gave me a small drawing. It showed 4 people standing in front of a blue house under a bright yellow sun. In the corner, she had written 4 words in uneven handwriting: "Thank you for home." I kept that drawing. Maren thanked Brielle, then thanked me. She told me that what we had given them was not simply a place to sleep. We had given them enough time to believe their lives could begin again. After they left, my house felt strangely quiet. I walked upstairs and opened the guest room door for the first time since returning. The room was almost exactly as I remembered it, except for one small change. On the windowsill sat a vase filled with the flowers I had originally bought for Brielle. She had put them there because she thought I might be angry and never want to see her again. I carried the vase downstairs. Brielle was standing in the kitchen, looking nervous. I handed her the flowers and told her that next time she wanted to save someone, she should call me first. She laughed through her tears and promised she would. Years later, I still think about that day whenever someone tells me that trust is either perfect or broken. I no longer believe that. Trust can crack. People can make terrible choices. Friends can hurt each other. But sometimes, if both people are willing to be honest, humble, and patient, something stronger can grow in the place where the damage occurred. Brielle taught me that kindness without boundaries can become reckless, but boundaries without compassion can become cruelty. Maren taught me that accepting help does not make someone weak. Elsie taught me that children remember the moments when adults choose to protect them. And I learned something about coming home. Sometimes you return expecting everything to be exactly as you left it. Sometimes you open your front door and discover that your life has changed without your permission. You may feel angry. You may feel betrayed. You may even wonder whether the person you trusted most deserves another chance. But before you close the door forever, look carefully at what happened. Sometimes behind the secret you are afraid to uncover, there is a person who was desperate to survive. Sometimes behind the mistake is someone who cared enough to take a risk. And sometimes the hardest thing you can do is not walk away, but stay long enough to understand. If this story touched your heart, please like this video, leave a meaningful comment, share it with someone who needs hope today, and subscribe to our channel so you never miss another emotional journey. And before you leave, tell us in the comments this: would you forgive your best friend for breaking your trust if their mistake was made to protect someone who desperately needed help? Because sometimes the people who hurt us are not trying to destroy our lives. Sometimes they are simply trying, imperfectly, to save someone else's. And sometimes, the greatest proof of friendship is not never making a mistake. It is finding the courage to admit it, the humility to repair it, and the love to stay when forgiveness becomes possible. The memory of that house stayed with me long after Maren and Elsie had moved into their new apartment. I thought I had forgiven Brielle completely, but forgiveness, I discovered, was not a switch that could simply be turned on. It was more like rebuilding a bridge one piece at a time. Some days I felt completely at peace with what had happened. Other days, when I found something out of place or noticed the spare key sitting on the kitchen counter, a small voice inside me reminded me that my trust had once been broken. I never wanted to punish Betrayal for the rest of her life, but I also knew that pretending I had never been hurt would not make the friendship healthier. Betrayal understood that better than anyone. She stopped assuming she could make decisions for me, even when she was convinced she knew what was best. Before borrowing anything, she asked. Before entering a private room, she asked. Before making plans that involved my home, she asked. It was almost funny at first because the woman who had once brought two strangers into my house without permission suddenly asked whether she could move a flower pot from one side of the porch to the other. But beneath the humor was something meaningful. She was showing me, through small actions, that she had learned from her mistake. I began learning from it too. A few months after Maren left, I received a letter from her. She explained that her new job was going well and that Elsie had started making friends at school. She said they had finally bought a small dining table for their apartment, and on the first day they used it, Elsie insisted they place a little vase of flowers in the middle because that was what people did when they wanted a house to feel like home. Maren thanked me again, but I knew the truth. I had not been the person who saved them. Betrayal had been the first person willing to stop and notice that they needed help. I had simply chosen not to undo the kindness she had started. The letter ended with a photograph of Elsie standing beside her school backpack, smiling with missing front teeth. On the back, Maren had written that Elsie still called my house the blue house of second chances. I kept that photograph beside the drawing. Months passed, and life became ordinary again. Betrayal returned to her apartment, and I returned to my routine. We still met for lunch, argued about ridiculous things, laughed about old memories, and complained about work. But something had changed between us. Our friendship was no longer based on the assumption that we understood each other perfectly. It was based on something much stronger, knowing that we didn't. That distinction mattered. I had once believed that loving someone meant knowing what they would do before they did it. Now I understood that loving someone meant allowing them to surprise you, even when the surprise frightened you. Then one Saturday morning, Betrayal called me with news I never expected. She had decided to start a small community assistance program through her workplace. It would connect struggling families with temporary housing, food, employment opportunities, and people willing to help them get back on their feet. She wanted to name it after Elsie's drawing, but she was afraid that would embarrass Maren. I told her to ask. She did. Maren agreed. The program became known locally as the Blue House Project. It began with 3 families and a handful of volunteers. Within a year, dozens of people had received groceries, temporary housing referrals, job connections, and basic financial assistance. Betrayal never took credit for it. Whenever someone thanked her, she always said the same thing: she had once made a mistake while trying to help someone, and that mistake taught her that kindness needed structure if it was going to last. I watched her change from someone who tried to save everyone herself into someone who built a system where people could help each other safely. That was the redemption I had not expected. One afternoon, I visited the community center where the project held its meetings. Betrayal was standing near a table covered with donated school supplies. Maren was organizing notebooks while Elsie sat nearby drawing pictures. When she saw me, she ran toward me with the same excitement she had shown the first time she realized I was not going to send them away. She handed me another drawing. This one showed the same blue house, but there were dozens of people standing outside it. I asked her why there were so many people. She looked at me as if the answer were obvious and said that a home should never be only one house. That sentence stayed with me. A home, I realized, could be a person. It could be a promise. It could be a second chance. It could be the moment someone finally believes they are not alone. Years later, I would sometimes drive past the neighborhood where Maren lived. Her small apartment was no longer small in the way it once seemed. There were flowers on the balcony, children's drawings in the windows, and bicycles leaning against the building. Life had left its fingerprints everywhere. Maren eventually remarried, not because she needed someone to rescue her, but because she had met someone who respected the life she had rebuilt. Elsie grew into a confident young woman who remembered every person who had helped her mother during those difficult months. And Betrayal became one of the most trusted people in our community, not because she was perfect, but because she had learned how powerful an imperfect person could become after taking responsibility for a mistake. As for me, I kept the spare key. But I gave Betrayal a new one. The difference was that this time, I gave it to her willingly. I told her that the key no longer represented blind trust. It represented earned trust. It meant that she could come into my home, but more importantly, it meant that she understood why I had once been afraid to let anyone do so. She held the key in her hand for a long moment before closing her fingers around it. Neither of us said much. We didn't need to. Some friendships survive because nothing ever goes wrong. Ours survived because something did. And perhaps that is why I no longer remember the fear on Betrayal's face as the most important part of the day I came home early. I remember what came after it. I remember the frightened little girl at the top of the stairs. I remember the mother who was trying desperately to stay strong. I remember the friend who made a terrible decision because she could not walk away from someone else's suffering. I remember the forgiveness that did not erase the pain but transformed it into something useful. Most of all, I remember opening that upstairs door. I had thought I was opening the door to a problem. Instead, I was opening the door to a lesson that would change the way I understood friendship forever. Sometimes the truth waiting upstairs is not the truth you fear. Sometimes it is the truth you need. And sometimes the person standing between you and that truth is not your enemy. Sometimes they are simply someone who is terrified that once you see everything, you will stop loving them. But real love, real friendship, and real forgiveness are not about loving people only when they make perfect choices. They are about seeing the whole person, including the mistake, the fear, the regret, the courage, and the heart behind it all. And when I think back to that afternoon, I realize something else. Betrayal had told me not to go upstairs because she was afraid I would discover what she had done. But what she didn't understand was that I was going to discover something about myself too. I was going to discover that I had a choice. I could protect my pride, or I could protect a frightened child. I could punish my friend, or I could teach her that mistakes could be repaired. I could close the door because my trust had been damaged, or I could leave it open just enough for something better to grow. I chose the door. And years later, I am grateful I did. Because sometimes forgiveness doesn't change the past. Sometimes it changes everything that comes after it.